Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to tell you just a tiny bit about something that has fascinated me for most of my life. I believe one of the greatest challenges facing us today is the question of how to responsibly manage the waste created by the nuclear industry. These are materials that will be with us for a very long time, and they pose a great threat to human health, the ecosystem, and the waterways. In Canada alone, there's already about 3 million canisters of spent nuclear fuel, which is considered high-level radioactive waste. And to get an idea of the sense of scale, that's about the equivalent of 7 hockey rinks filled to the top of the boards with the canisters of waste stacked like cordwood. And then we also have intermediate and low-level waste, as well as uranium tailings. These are less highly radioactive, but they exist in far greater quantities. And this question of responsibly managing the waste is very pertinent right now, because at this moment, there's a lot of attention that's being placed on the potential for nuclear power to meet much of our energy needs. It creates a far lower carbon footprint than fossil fuels. But this question of how to responsibly deal with this waste is becoming more and more pressing for the nuclear industry to address, to be able to gain the public support to move forward with plans. Currently, the deep geological repositories are widely considered to be the most feasible plan for storing nuclear waste for the hundreds of thousands of years that it will remain dangerous. As the name suggests, these deep geological repositories will be storing the waste deep underground. This is a massive feat of engineering. There are very few structures that we have built as humans that have had to withstand such a great time span. But nuclear waste is one of those things that will continue for a very, very long time. It is going to last, whether we can contain it or not. So this question of how to responsibly communicate about our waste is a very challenging one. Climate, wars, migration, these are all things that change and impact our languages, nations, and structures of society. It's very hard to predict how future societies might look, nor can we assume that future societies will remain technologically literate. This waste that we've created will last longer than any other creations that we've had. And if we want to create a message to carry forward with that waste, I believe one of the best ways that we can do that is through art. Art and cultural creations have persisted throughout all of humanity. Cave paintings, pictographs, pyramids, stories, songs, legends. Cultural creations can be passed down from generation to generation. And art and culture can help to transmit messages over massive spans of time. Even if individual works are fragile, the practice of making art can be handed down generation to generation. Because in art and cultural practices, the meaning is created in the making. And when we pay attention to the artwork and to the stories, we keep that practice alive. From a very young age, I had this strange sense that when we split the atom through nuclear fission, we fundamentally changed our relationship to time and space. We'd unleashed this energy that we'd never known before, so incredibly powerful. But we'd also created this material that was going to last essentially forever and have to be cared for by our descendants for the rest of human existence. And this was just very overwhelming. We had let this atomic genie out of the bottle, and this genie was not going to easily go back into its bottle. From a young age, I also had this sense, I'm not exactly sure how it came to be, it's a much longer story, but I had this sense that Indigenous knowledge was key to our survival as a species. And that's what brought me here to the Algoma region. There was a school here called White Mountain Academy of the Arts, and they were bringing together Western art practices with Anishinaabe art and traditional knowledge. And I wanted to study here. But I also knew that Elliot Lake, where White Mountain was located, was the site of a former uranium mining town. And that terrified me. When I first went up there, I was immediately struck by the strange dichotomy of the absolutely beautiful landscape and the knowledge of these uranium tailings that existed all around the town. But I decided to confront my fear. And in my very first week of studying there, I had the opportunity, and by studying I mean camping, I had the experience of getting to travel across Quirk Lake, which is just slightly north of Elliot Lake. And I got to travel across Quirk Lake on a birch bark canoe that students had made a few years before, or a couple of years before. And Quirk Lake is a very large lake, and there's this incredible cliff at the edge of the lake, and it's the site of a former, or where vision quests were done by the Anishinaabe of Serpent River, and that same rock is where one of the mines actually was. And there were tailings all around this lake, and one tailing dam that even butted right up to Quirk Lake. So I was immediately being forced to confront my fear, while at the same time seeing the spectacular beauty of this place. And that got me committed to continuing to confront my fear. And while I lived in Elliot Lake, I also got to meet a man named Gilbert Oscaboose. He was a writer from Serpent River. And he told me about a legend about a serpent that had laid eggs in the rock many, many years ago. And that the people there knew, the Anishinaabe people knew, not to disturb those eggs, because if those eggs were disturbed, it would unleash a great power, and it would bring sickness to the people. And if you've ever seen the rock cuts in Elliot Lake, or if you've been there, the places where they mine, the way when the lava poured down through the region millions of years ago, it created like these round rocks are embedded in this bigger rock, and the uranium actually exists in that space between the rock, the smaller rock, and the big rock, so it's like the eggshell. But of course, the warning embedded in that legend was ignored, just as many other warnings embedded in legends in many of the places where uranium were mined around the world was ignored. I also learned while living there that the uranium didn't just stay in Elliot Lake. It moved south. The uranium was refined in Blind River, and then in Port Hope, which was just south of where I had grown up. And I didn't even know that there was uranium refining happening in Port Hope when I was growing up in Peterborough. And it wasn't just the materials that moved by people through the region to the south, but throughout the whole time the mining was happening, contamination was seeping through from the tailings down the Serpent River and into the Great Lakes. I also learned while living in Elliot Lake that it made people uncomfortable to talk about radioactivity or radiation, especially because it was in their backyard. Radiation, you can't see, hear, smell, or taste radioactivity, so it's very easy to ignore, and it's completely understandable that they did. But I found that by making art, I was able to open conversations with people in a gentler way about this, and it became more participatory. And it became a vehicle for understanding for me. Because this genie that we let out of the bottle, it's very complicated, and it's so interconnected with so much of our lives. And I made art about lots of different aspects of the nuclear industry. I traveled to the uranium tailings in Elliot Lake often and regularly. And though it seems counterintuitive, I often bring friends and family with me. And it's because it ends up being this moment where I'm able to transfer this story about these places in a very meaningful and visceral way. Hopefully not too visceral, but I also am able to look at the tailings over time and see the changes in them. And just about anyone who's come with me, I think anyone who has come with me, agrees that these tailing dams in that area, they don't seem like they're going to actually be able to hold the waste for 10,000 years. And I visited tailings in New Mexico, in Utah, throughout the Navajo Nation. I visited the Trinity site in New Mexico where the first atomic weapon was tested. I camped in the Nevada desert at the edge of the Nevada test site on the lands of the Western Shoshone, where the US had detonated more than 1,000 nuclear warheads. Witnessing these sites was important to me. These sites were placed at areas that were meant to be ignored by mainstream society. Even just me paying attention to them is important, but I'm not the only one. So this question of trying to create signs to keep people out, it's a difficult one. And I know the signs that were placed at these sites, they certainly didn't keep me out of them. In the 1980s, early 1980s, the US government created the Human Interference Task Force. It was an interdisciplinary effort to bring together thinkers from many different fields to try and come up with various scenarios and plans for how to communicate about the dangers of radioactive waste for people for many hundreds of thousands of years, as deep geological repositories were being in the planning stages. And they came up with some really interesting concepts. One of them was creating an atomic priesthood and a sort of religion to dissuade people from going to these sites. Some included creating giant landscapes of thorns, ominous forms in the landscapes. Others, of course, were just general markers with signs that would have to be updated and changed over time. Another involved bioengineering cats to turn color when they encountered radioactivity in the environment, so they could warn their people that there was something afoot in the land. And although these concepts were interesting, none of them were deemed sufficient on their own to be able to take on this incredible job of communicating about the nuclear waste for many hundreds of thousands of years. But plans are moving forward to create deep geological repositories around the world. Switzerland, Sweden, France, Finland, the US, the UK, and Canada are all working on plans for deep geological repositories. The Onkalo site in Finland is almost completed construction. They plan to begin operations in 2023. This process is taking a while, but it's giving us more time to think about the communications plan, to think about our role as community members in these planning processes, because this is a big commitment, a big responsibility. More recent interdisciplinary and international task forces are working on creating plans for those communications still. And one of those task force, or the main international body, created a plan for building upon the work done by the Human Interference Task Force. They're building on a plan for preserving records, memory, and knowledge. And that plan is much more comprehensive, and it looks at the multifaceted ways that we have to address this issue. This plan also places arts, culture, and education as central to, as a central role in communicating about the short-term, long-term, and medium-term maintenance of the knowledge over time. And this is where we come in here at Algoma. We already house the largest mass of nuclear waste in Canada. It's not the highest level, but we have over 200 million tons of radioactive waste in the Elliot Lake region along the Serpent River watershed. As a close-by community, I think we have some responsibility to that. And I believe that we here at Algoma University and in the whole community can become leaders in that preservation of records, memory, and knowledge. Some of the other highlights of the plans for the preservation of records, memory, and knowledge highlighted that this work had to be done in communities and for communities. Much of it could be mandated by governments, but to be really effective, it had to be created right in the communities that were affected. The other ways that we're connected to this is that two of the proposed sites for deep geological repositories in Canada are close by. One is within the Great Lakes Basin watershed, which puts our drinking water or our waters at risk. The other would require all of the waste from all of the reactors in Canada to be transported through our region, either on the waterways, by road or rail. For the past 12 years, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization has been working to find a willing host for this material. Right now, the last two communities in the running are Saugeen First Nation in Bruce Peninsula and Wabigoon Lake First Nation northwest of Thunder Bay. And while personally I don't feel comfortable with either site or these options, it seems a decision is going to be made soon. But I hope when they do make these, if they do go forward with these plans, they will keep the waste retrievable for as long as possible, because I also hope that nuclear engineers will come up with more efficient ways of using that energy that's stored in the waste, because there's a tremendous amount of energy that still exists in the fuel. But it seems that a decision is going to be made about these sites before proper technology, a more efficient technology, is going to be available. I believe that we here at Algoma University could play a remarkable role in creating localized and internationally networked research to address this issue. I think we could play a tremendous role in launching this work, not just here, but internationally, connecting with other communities that are also facing this, because really Canada has a bit less high-level nuclear waste than most other countries. We have a lot of low-level waste. We already excel in the creation of and maintenance of archives. Through the Shingwalk Residential School Centre has proven to us that archives are a powerful force for creating incredible change, especially when they're maintained and involve participation from the community. By building arts, culture, and education around our nuclear history, we can also play a foundational role in the soon-to-be-developed Freshwater Research Institute that has a goal of keeping our freshwater in the Great Lakes clean for generations to come. We also need to protect and promote the creation of arts and culture here in this region so that the story of this land is not just the story of the arts and culture that is created in the south, but it's about the arts and the stories that are happening right here. We have a responsibility to this place, and most of us that are here love this place. But by creating these local and international links, working on this work, I think we can really move forward and take this responsibility and not just take it on as a role, but take it sort of deep in our hearts. I plan to teach a course on this topic next year, and I would love to be able to take students to Finland and visit the Onkalo site and work with my network of artists and community members there that are also working on this issue. Art is central in this role. It's not only about preserving the knowledge and memory, but it's about helping us work through the psychological and spiritual complexity of this issue now. I do believe that by doing this work, we can turn the waste into one of our biggest teachers. It doesn't have to be just waste, because there is an energy in it. And when we're putting it in the ground without truly tapping that energy, it has to go somewhere. And if we can turn it into a teacher, it can be one of our most powerful teachers, to teach us to truly be responsible, to care for, and pay attention to future generations. Thank you.